They say MMA is a young man's sport. I mean, of course it is, right? When you see stuff like this,
my God, what a painful image.
There are just constant reminders of this fact over the years. But is it truly a young man's game? I mean, first off, where do you even define somebody no longer being young? 30? 35? Is it older than that? Well, I've personally done a bit of research, and wow, are the numbers not what you would expect. And it was spurned on by Oven, who actually runs our social media accounts. We were having a chat one day shortly after he posted this graphic pointing out that of the current top 10 lightweights plus the champion, there is literally only Arman Tsarukyan who is still in his 20s, and yeah, there's a 6-year age gap between him and everyone else in the top 10. I mean, if Poirier and Gaethje both at age 36 lead the division this year like a lot of people are speculating, that could definitely lower it, but even if you do remove both of them, the average is still quite high, assuming you slot in Paddy and Fiziev, who would move up to 9 and 10 respectively. Still, it's over 33 years old. The same is true if you slot in Topuria instead of Fiziev. It's 33. So, I got a bit crazy with this. Are we in an outlier or an exception of a year with lightweight? Surely the division's just seen a few guys hold on a bit longer, but yeah, I ran the numbers. I went all the way back to 2013, which was the first year the UFC officially added their rankings. By the way, I'm only sticking to the top 10 plus the champion because back in 2013, it was only a top 10, not a top 15. And so I tossed it all into spreadsheets, and yeah, dude, that is a sharp incline over the years. It's definitely not just this year. In February of 2013, the average was just 28 years old. Think about that. Arman Tsarukyan is the youngest guy in the top 10 right now, and his age, 28, used to be the average. A 6-year swing over the last 12 years. That is crazy. Again, it's a steady rise. Okay, so at this point, I have to ask, what do the other divisions look like? So I decided to look into that too. I pulled up the Wayback Machine and looked at the same time of year as of now, going to February in each of those years all the way back to 2013. And sure enough, it ain't just lightweight. Literally every division has a higher average than it did back in 2013. There are only a couple divisions that were close, but we'll break those down as well. So, of the 11 divisions the UFC has, every single one of them has gone up, all of them. 8 of those 11 went up in a very consistent manner over those years, while 3 of them don't really have a strong correlation. The first of those 3 exceptions you'd definitely expect. Heavyweight has just kind of always been old. So while it did start younger in 2013, it's not crazy to have an average of over 34 years old in 2025. Its average has been as high as 35 and a half, and a few more years have been over 35, or 34 for that matter. So I don't think anybody is surprised. It's heavyweight. The only other male division that does not have an upward trend in age is middleweight. As awkward but yet oddly effective as the division's champion Dricus, 2025's average age is only slightly higher than it was in 2013. But it's kind of all over the place. Perhaps that's due to so many guys in their top ranks being originally from welterweight, which definitely does skew younger, but your guess is as good as mine on that. And then let's look at the rest of the divisions. Light heavyweight's gone up and down a bit over the years, but has a very clear trend line upwards, starting at just over 31 in 2013 and ending up at now over 34 for the average age. Welterweight used to actually average in the 20s at 29 and has steadily trended upwards to almost 33. There have been larger peaks, but again, the trend line has consistently gone up since 2013. We've already talked about the crazy lightweight 6-year swing. Featherweight has also trended upward sharply with a 5-year swing in average, starting at just over 28 and hitting 33 this year. Bantamweight has increased at a constant rate as well, from 29 to 32 and a half, and even flyweight too, with 28 up past 31. If there was any division that had a chance of remaining under 30, I thought this was going to be the one. So that means none of the men's divisions have an average age in the top 10s under 30. And if you saw Tommy Tohold's video last year on the average age of decline in the UFC, it's 34. A few of these divisions are over that, and a bunch of them are only about a year off from that. Compare that to 2013 when 5 of the 8 men's divisions all had an average below 30. Basically, it was only middleweight up to heavyweight that was over 30 back then, the heavier classes. Then we go to the women's divisions. For bantamweight, there had been an astounding 7-year swing from 2013 to last year. And it's actually just gone down slightly because Holly Holm was 42 and left at the end of last year. But that is the biggest swing of any division. Women's flyweight is slightly more than it was for the first year. It was listed in February of 2018. That was the first full year it had in the rankings, 31.45 years old on average, to now just slightly more at 31.73. So basically no difference. But it has been all over the place. No clear trend up or down. My suspected reason is that when the division first started, a bunch of people from both strawweight and bantamweight moved into the division. You know, people like Andrade or even Joanna, who had a title shot at Shevchenko back in the day. Jessica Ai somehow ended up at the top of that division too, Liz Carmouche. And yeah, it's not been around for very long. So those two things together, it just really hasn't stabilized. Maybe that's starting to happen now, but it's taken some time. Thankfully, there is some very new talent that's helped to lower it recently, which I can't say of a few other weight classes. For strawweight, there's been another huge swing since it was established in December of 2014, of course sticking with February of 2015 so we get a full year to compare it with. It's an even interval to now, of course, and there's a nearly 6-year swing. And so there you have it, a few exceptions, but the trend is quite robust and widespread across nearly all the UFC divisions. But it's not just that, the age of the champions have gone up as well across the board. In 2013, the average age of any champion in the UFC was 28.4 years old. Now, it's over 34. Another 6-year swing. Again, to call back to Tommy Tola's video on the age of decline, the average champion age is over the age of decline. That's crazy. And you can see this is very steadily increased over the years, a very clear trend. And it's true of every weight class individually as well. Blue is the earliest year for each of the divisions, and red is 2025. The only exception is again middleweight Silva's last year being in 2013 as champion, which of course was a title he lost only a couple months later for the first time to Chris Weidman. But that was just a comparison of 2013 versus 2025. If you look at this graph, this is actually 2025, still in the red, the same color, but green now represents the average over the time going back to 2013 for all these weight classes, and nearly all of them are way lower than they are today. Notably, middleweight was actually higher, featherweight was higher, but that's it. The rest of them are all way higher than they used to be. And there's another interesting thing here. The UFC is also not producing a ton of young champions anymore. If you jump to the youngest champion records, the top 5, Jones of course holds number 1 at age 23. That was way back in 2011 when he beat Shogun, and it also just so happens to be the last record set in the top 5 in the last 14 years since it happened. And that's the thing. Nobody's come even close to breaking into the top 5 youngest champions in the last 8 years. You'd have to be under 25 years and 13 days like Frank Shamrock to break into the youngest champions. The last time the UFC had somebody the age of 25 win a title was 2017. Since then, no one under the age of 27 has become champion in any division. We haven't even had somebody challenge for a title as young as 25 since that year. So yeah, the divisions are getting older at the top, the champions are getting older, and they are winning the titles for the first time later. And so now we arrive at the incredibly difficult question of, well, why is this happening? Spoiler alert, there's not really a clear answer, but there are some interesting speculations we can make here. Let me explain. The most obvious thing is fighters are hanging around in the top 10 for much longer than they used to. For instance, Rose Namajunas was immediately ranked at number 1 for strawweight after losing the Ultimate Fighter season to Carla Esparza. You know, that was for the title way back in December of 2014, and then she stayed in the top 10 or was champion basically all throughout the time that she was there until 2023. And the only reason she's not in there now is because she's moved up to 125, and she's in their top 10. She'd still be there now. Beneil Dariush has been in the lightweight rankings since 2016. He's dropped out of it once or twice, but basically he's been a top-ranked fighter for 9 years. Poirier similarly has been in since 2017 and obviously still is in the top 10 today. If he leaves, it'll be out of his own volition. It's not like he'll be kicked out of the division by the competition. The same goes for Usman and Colby at welterweight. They've been there since 2017. Or forget about it, at heavyweight, Stipe was still in the top 10 rankings lasting from 2014 until just last year, where he made it through the entire year before retiring. So almost 11 years for him. And of course, Jones has been in the rankings since they were established. It's just been split between 2 different weight classes now. And of course, there's always been exceptions or outliers. Yoel was in his 40s, so was DC, Holm, or Glover, and even before the rankings were established, you had guys like Couture. But of course, sticking to since rankings have existed, it hasn't really skewed it for the ones that happen over that age. And frankly, 40-somethings are just a reality of UFC heavyweights these days. There have been at least one 40-year-old at heavyweight in the top 10 rankings for the last decade. But this doesn't really answer the question. Why aren't these aging fighters retiring sooner or getting beaten out of the rankings? One example could be the size of the divisions themselves. If you use Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, you might have seen John Morgan's breakdown of each division size in the UFC currently. For one, man, look at heavyweight. Only 30 people are in that weight class. That means literally, especially if you just look at the top 15, that's half the weight class already. Not a good look. Women's bantamweight has only 32, and if the divisions are these weak, then perhaps they're just running out of talent. Everyone's just getting older and no new people are replacing them because they just don't have that many talents, right? And so as soon as I saw this, I had to include it in my research. And to be totally transparent, I do not have the access that John Morgan does to these kind of numbers. As a media member with the UFC, he gets more access to these kind of things, especially because I do believe he is part of the rankings panel. He'll definitely get a way more granular perspective on this. So what I'm left with is Wikipedia, who thankfully has tracked division sizes going all the way back to 2010 thanks to the Wayback Machine. And yeah, I know it's Wikipedia.
On the Wikipedia.
So you know you are getting the best possible information.
But to be fair to it, the numbers are actually more pessimistic than John Morgan's numbers. For one, it actually lists heavyweight as having only 29 fighters currently, not 30. I'm not sure where that discrepancy lies, but at least it's not too far off. And the surprising thing is, 29 or 30 is not the lowest we've seen the division at. And there's an interesting aspect to this. Think of your favorite era in heavyweight, for example. To me, this is pretty surprising. Back in 2010, you know the year Cain Velasquez beat Brock Lesnar for the heavyweight title? There were only 27 heavyweights listed. It was even less the following year in 2011. You know, when the whole Cain-JDS rivalry was going on, there were just 26. There was 31 in 2012, 28 in 2013. Now don't get me wrong, this number definitely went up and it was hovering around the mid-40s from 2017 onward. A lot better than it is now, and yes, it is currently bad for the division. But when you look at this stuff more closely, one, it's got nothing to do with the quality of the division. Clearly, when the numbers were low during 2011, 2012, 2013, everybody thought the division was doing really well. And of course, it's zero explanation for the class being older today. So it doesn't answer this question either of why the classes are older. It doesn't correlate with the roster size. But interestingly, this whole aging roster thing isn't an exclusive phenomenon to the UFC. Obviously, the GFL's got the aging thing covered for the rest of MMA's sake, but what about the other major sports? Well, while not as dramatic on average, it definitely is rising, albeit on a much lower scale in the NBA. For instance, with basically trying to compare like for like here, the top championship player levels in the NBA, which is similar to the UFC's top level rankings, they've pretty well skewed older over the years. To quote Nickelback, look at this graph. That top line is the Hall of Fame level players, and while it has curved down a bit, it's still higher than all the previous years before some of those ages started shooting up. And if you look closer, the Hall of Fame level players, it's right around 36 for that age, quite a bit later than the rest of the NBA. And furthermore, it's all aging upwards is true of the rest of the NBA's roster. But let's not act like this is as dramatic as the UFC's rising ages. There's a 6-year gap for the UFC champions average over the last 12 years. I did look at the NFL's for this, and despite the Tom Brady's or Jason Peters having careers that reached well into their 40s, it's about as big as an outlier can get. They are exceptions, they're not the rule. The rule shows the championship caliber players in the NFL have been remarkably consistent. I mean, most players only last a little over 3 years before even retiring. It's a much younger man's game than anything else we've looked at so far. But what about some more comparable sports to MMA? Boxing is a lot harder to find data like this on, but for the Olympic level freestyle wrestlers, which are the best of the best wrestlers on the planet, and of course they have a comparable weight class system to MMA, none of these averages per weight class get even as high as 29. It's all under 30. By the way, that's in kg on the left-hand number there. It definitely throws you off a little bit. But that doesn't change the fact that outliers do indeed exist. Mian Lopez of Cuba just retired at age 42 after winning gold yet again at the Paris Olympics last year. Or how about in basketball with LeBron James? Dude is 40, well above the average, and says he plans to stick around for a few more years. To put that in context, here's what Jimmy High Rollers had to say on his YouTube channel when looking at the data.
You'll notice a trend going on here. Here's Bird, Magic, Jordan. Here's Kobe, Shaq, Duncan, Garnett, and Wade. A prime that lasts from about season 6 to season 10 or 11. And then around season 12 or 13, the decline begins. Around season 17 or 18, the wheels completely fall off and retirement awaits. Except for LeBron.
And of course, in the NFL, I already mentioned Tom Brady. He was 46. Jason Peters is 43. So whether or not it's part of a larger trend or not, or if these athletes are forebearers of a trend yet to come, it's fascinating to think about and how this is happening. But it all comes back to the question of why? Many will simply say it's down to education, healthy practices, less partying, getting wild in the off season for traditional sports or on the weekends, smarter strategies overall to tackle the game when they're older. No doubt this absolutely does play a role. There's no way it doesn't. But I think there's a very clear elephant in the room, and nobody's going to be exempt from this conversation. And of course, I'm talking about PEDs. They help you recover faster, prevent your body from breaking down when carefully monitored, and of course, the more money you make, the more affordable a regimented protocol is, supervised by experts that make these things far more possible later into an athlete's career. The most infamous example is Victor Conte and the Balco scandal. His athletes never tested positive for anything, fun fact.
I know that the anti-doping rules that are in place are so easy for the athletes to beat. It's like taking candy from a baby.
Somebody ratted them all out. If that didn't happen, it's possible we would have never even known about this. They weren't even testing for the clear, which was his big thing that he used on his athletes. In fact, most of the major scandals in the big team sports you've heard about never tested positive for anything. Same with Lance Armstrong. His teammates turned him in. A lot of times, that's the only way we even hear about these things. And going back to Victor Conte's example, his PED tactics were designed to get around the Olympic or world-class level test with his athletes as they underwent a scheduled out and regimented plan. This is something a higher level athlete, and of course a higher paid one, can have access to. Somebody who makes it easy for them, schedules it out, and tells them how to avoid it all. I don't know if that's going to be the same for your average rank and file 10-10 UFC fighter. Personally, I'm haunted by this quote from Don Catlin, the guy who developed most of the United States testing protocols going all the way back to the 80s and on through the 2000s.
They're all doping. Every single one of them. It's really easy to beat. Very easy.
He even came up with the testing protocols for what I was talking about with Victor Conte, the Clear. Basically the godfather of testing protocols in the United States. I've got a whole hour-long documentary about PEDs in sports, which I'll link at the end of this video if you guys want to check that out too, by the way. Let's get it straight. I'm certainly not accusing guys like Dustin Poirier of being on PEDs and that being the reason he's still 36 and in the division. In fact, he's one of the people on the roster I think I would be the most surprised to hear about doing anything like that. I really don't think he's on anything. Am I going to say that's true for this whole trend of all the aging fighters, that none of them are doing anything? Of course, a few of them definitely are. Islam Makhachev might not be on anything these days, but he has already popped for meldonium. This is something that's been swept under the rug and everybody forgets about. Meldonium is basically an Eastern European version of EPO, and he popped for that when USADA was first starting up in the UFC, and he said it was for his heart. I guess that could be true. And let's be real, a lot of shit people do these days is basically undetectable. HGH, testosterone. When I spoke to More Plates, More Dates about this last year, he had some really great ways of explaining it.
The synthetic ones that aren't supposed to be present in any quantity whatsoever because your body doesn't naturally produce it, like your balls don't shoot out D-ball. So it's pretty easy to see if there's like micro quantities of it in your urine, like, okay, that's not supposed to be there. But with testosterone, it gets really finicky because it's like, oh, well, this guy could be an outlier. It's supposed to be there. So if you find a significant amount of testosterone, even above threshold values, like there still needs to be more nuance and dissection that goes into establishing, is this guy cheating or not? So your pituitary produces a certain amount of GH and the detection times of it are so short. It's essentially, I wouldn't say impossible, but it's like, if you look at the history of HGH testing, it took like over 1,000 tests before they even had one positive. It's so difficult to detect because it is, again, similar to testosterone. It's supposed to be there.
And for the more mundane side of it, for those that are totally clean, it probably is just healthier practices, smarter techniques, and better training methods. There isn't one single answer for what causes something like this. For instance, many people feel like the sport is in decline, so maybe you could blame that for why some of the athletes are older. It's just not attracting younger talents like it used to. I don't know if I necessarily believe that's the reason, but there is no doubt that some divisions are definitely in decline. Women's bantamweight certainly isn't anything like it once was. Strawweight is, hanging on. Zhang is holding it down really well, but the rest of the division I'm not so sure about. There's no more Roses or Joannas that can really challenge her anymore. So I think those divisions have aged out because there really hasn't been anybody new. It's kind of like the same top 10s the whole time. And for divisions like men's lightweight, you are definitely seeing the next generation clearly come around, but they are figuratively and literally getting boxed out. I mean, who took out BSD? It was Poirier and Moicano, two fighters in their mid-30s. But I'd be lying if I'd say this info isn't tempting to view as concerning. It definitely is. For those that saw my prospect losses video from a few weeks ago, it feels like the vast majority of new prospects have just been getting smashed lately. But it's a chicken or the egg kind of scenario. Is that due to them, or is that due to the extremely good quality of these athletes who are staying healthier and continually getting better? Most people would say Dustin Poirier performed better against Islam than he did against Khabib because he improved his training methods to handle that style. But the point of this video is to show that this is happening, explore why it might be happening. The major point is what the data says, and the trend is clear. It is getting older in every way. So I'm super curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this one. It took me a while to compile all this info together, and I find it absolutely fascinating. Shout out to our channel members. I went into even more detail in our writers meetings. If you guys want to join in on those, you can see that extra content as it happens live. And if you're not interested, that's cool. I'm just really happy you guys chose to watch today. So go ahead and like and subscribe to help the channel out if you did enjoy it, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace.